Mr. Governor, thank you very much for giving us time to speak with you on Channels Television. You hardly give personal interviews, so this one, we appreciate that. It's taken almost 3.5 years in coming.
Thank you.
But let's go back to June 2014. Let's start. What was your recap the fiscal, monetary, financial system environment that you inherited in June 2014 when you took office?
Well, thank you very much, Poston, and let me thank Channels for giving us an opportunity to express ourselves once more. Yeah, you talked about the fact that in the last 2.5 years we've not had time to really discuss some of these issues, but I think usually our approach is to see to it that we do a lot of the work, and at some point we'll come out and speak. But of course, we've always used the opportunity of the Monetary Policy Committee meetings that happens every other month to provide perspectives about what we're doing at the Central Bank of Nigeria, Monetary Policy Committee perspectives about views about macroeconomic situation in the country. And that we've done consistently in the last 3.5 years since I assumed office. But I think it's important for us to cast our minds back. Even before 2014, between 2009 and 2014, and I'll use that as an example, that for 5 straight years, we had crude price averaging about $120 per barrel. Indeed, by September 2008, the country's reserves stood at $62 billion. Those were periods when we had a lot of bumper. Inflation was low. At that point, it was possible for central bank to fix an inflation targeting policy, say between 6 and 9%. To the point that by April 2014, shortly before we assumed office, inflation was 7.9%, which was at about a 6-year low. Reserves, as a result of the pressures we saw between 2008 and 2009, had come down to about $37 billion. Interest rates, even at that time, one would say was also relatively stable because inflation rate was also good. But indeed, during that time as well, the monetary policy environment was tight because CRR was about 15%, right? MPR was indeed almost about 12%, if I can recall it very correctly. So it was essentially a tight monetary policy environment that we inherited, because at that time the global shock had started to show signs of manifestation, to the point that sometime, of course, by the third quarter of 2014, it had become so manifest. But when we came into office, we had our own vision. And the vision, and indeed, I was among the first set up, I would say, the governors of the Central Bank of Nigeria that came out just 2 days after I resumed office and set an agenda and said, this is what we want to do.
I will talk about your agenda, Mr. Governor.
Yes.
But just a few months into, less than a year into your office, there was a new political administration.
Yeah.
Your vision in just a moment. But just a few months, as you're just settling into office, there was a change in political administration, so there was a change of leadership in the country. What were the key issues for you then, looking at the political landscape, the change of governance, the change of a new president, a new cabinet, a new entirely political party in the country? How did you feel by the time? What were the key issues that you took on board with the rest of your team at the Central Bank?
Well, basically nothing extraordinary in the sense that the Central Bank of Nigeria is an independent institution focusing primarily on its own core mandate, monetary policy, and then making sure that the monetary macroeconomic environment remained stable. But unfortunately, at that time, the effect of the global shock had begun to manifest in the sense that by around August 2014, right, the crude commodity price was about $110 to the barrel, 2014, right, and our reserve was about 37, dropping to about 36. So by the time the government came in May 2015, reserve had come down to 29. Okay, the environment had begun to face some form of pressures. Okay, pressure because, like I said, 3 shocks, right? The shock from dropping commodity prices, which resulted in, of course, drop in crude prices, impacting adversely on our reserve. Geopolitical tensions along the trading routes across the world. Then you had the Russia-Ukraine crisis and the Crimea, and of course, even till now, we're seeing geopolitical tensions like between Saudi Arabia and indeed Iran. All these themselves have some effect on flow of capital between emerging and capital and the developed economies.
But with the new administration, I'm sure you will be thinking, hey, am I going to lose my job? Because this is a new president, this is a new administration. So were you scared of losing your job at that point?
Well, the point is that because of the independence of the Central Bank of Nigeria, I was sort of optimistic that because it's a government that we know has a lot of respect for the rule of law, and the fact that there was a specific tenure for the Central Bank of Nigeria governor, that the government would keep to that. And indeed, I must say that that has been the relationship till now, and it's been working very well.
Now, I wanted to ask, you've worked with the new administration for 2.5 years. So right now we can say you know the president very well, and he knows you very well.
Correct.
So describe your relationship, officially speaking, with this current administration, with the president himself, Muhammadu Buhari.
Well, the president is the leader of the country. He has a vision, and speaking specifically about the aspect of his vision that affects what we do at Central Bank of Nigeria is about the economy. And he set his vision about what he expects of the economy. Unfortunately, he came in at a time when the economy had begun a nosedive, and we were very certain that we were going to work very, very closely to see to it that whatever needed to be done to turn the economy around, that we will do so. And indeed, since that time, the relationship has been very, very cordial. Of course, other than being a leader, he is a father of the nation, an incorruptible leader, and to that extent, he's been able to set vision that we all have been able to key into, not just the monetary authority, but also the fiscal authorities, towards seeing to the fact that we easily come out of the recession that we were. I will use the word we were, because at this time we have actually, I would say substantially, we are out of the recession, and all we can expect at this time is a positive upward trajectory in terms of the growth of the economy.
Just a quick one. I need to check this slide. You outlined the vision. You said that in your earlier comments when you came in June 2014. What's the outline of this? Revisit that for us. Have you kept to that vision? How much of it has been done, and how much of it remains undone?
Well, like I said, we set a vision and made sure that 2 days after we resumed office, that we made the world know what kind of vision we had in mind.
That was
like
the key
question.
Did you ever know you were going to become a central bank governor?
Nobody expects those kind of things. I didn't know I was going to be CBN governor.
So while you were sitting down,
I was just sitting tight at the corner.
Yes.
And indeed, you would realize that I wasn't one of those names. Mine wasn't one of those names that were in the newspapers. About
yes, so you were a dark horse. We understand that.
Correct.
But you had a vision within 2 days, which means you hit the ground running. Which means as a commercial bank chief executive officer, you have your views of the monetary policy and the environment.
Yeah, aside from the fact that as the chief executive of one of the biggest banks in the country, that I had my views, and I have always thought that it was not insurmountable, some of the challenges we were facing. But you'll also recall that between about end of February when I was appointed, and June, I had a lot of time to ruminate over the entire country, the economy, the state of the country, and what we think we should be doing. I mean, Bosun, look at a situation where we're saying today, we're saying even at that time, we're looking at a country whose population was growing at an average of 3% per annum, right? And the rate of unemployment was already high anyway. And we said, if something is not done to ensure that the economy continues an upward trajectory, at 3% average by 2020, Bosun, this country will be close to about 200 to 205 million people. By 2050, we will be 450 million people, the country with the third largest population in the world. Something needed to be done, and we came with a vision to say, look, that we would work in an environment where we would be seen as a people-centered central bank. A people-centered bank in the sense that we will have at the back of our mind, in every decision that we take, both at management and at the monetary policy committee level, decisions that will impact positively, directly on the lives of our people. Yes, you will say, as a central bank, what you should be looking at is interest rate, inflation, exchange rate, reserves, and the rest of them. As you take decisions that impact, I use the word positively on reserve, exchange rate stability, on inflation, are you taking decisions that will positively impact the lives of our people? Central Bank of Nigeria, like one of the developing central banks, and luckily by the contents of our act, gives us the power to engage in development finance activities. So, which is really, really appropriate for a developing economic central bank. So we said, with all decisions we will take, if you say you want exchange rate to be stable, you want to build reserve, or you want inflation to be low and not high, how do you go below that and take decisions that people will understand are those decisions that will impact on the lives of the people?
But you're the man that's been blamed by many Nigerians for crashing the naira, of interest rate becoming very high and inflation at a high level. So many people believe that you're responsible for making things difficult. What's your reaction?
See, let me tell you this, Wilson. Leadership, particularly this responsibility that we are on, is not about popularity contest. It's about taking a decision that you feel is in the best interest of the country and the people. When you talk about inflation, you talk about interest rates, you talk about exchange rate, and I'll give you the analogy. I want you to know this, and if you watched my Senate presentation at the time I was going to be confirmed, interest rate was a major issue that came up, and I made my pledge that I would do everything possible to bring interest rates down, because it was in any case already high at that time. That's why the issue about bringing interest rates down came about. 2 days after I resumed, I made it part of my cardinal statement, my vision statements. I also raised the issue of exchange rate stability, building reserves, and the rest of them. But unfortunately, the exogenous shock happened. And what happened is that we're coming from an environment, I repeat, reserves are 37. Inflation in April was actually 7.9. All right? Now, because of the shock, the price of crude came down. Of course, reserves took a bad hit. Because reserves took a bad hit, imports were rising, exports, revenue from exports were dropping. You did not have any choice at that time but to go for a currency adjustment. And we went for a currency adjustment, as in adjusting from 155 to 168, from 168 to 197. And after that, we said no, we could not continue an indeterminate program of an adjustment in the currency, and went about the demand management that came on, and of course supply, which is what we're also attacking now, and that's why we have seen to the progress we've seen right now. So it has to do with the fact that we came into a situation that was outside of our control, and we needed to paddle the canoe back out of a turbulent situation into a good situation that I think we are right now.
Well, fortunately, the country has exited recession. So we'll look back a little bit, 2015, 2016, and you're saying, oh, hold on a second, what did we do right to be able to exit the recession from both the fiscal and monetary side?
Well, a couple of things had been done right, and when the recession set in, as it's certain, by the third quarter of 2016, we saw a contraction of minus 2.3%. Inflation had moved from 9% in January 2016 to 18.7% in January 2017. And it is important for us to understand why inflation moved that rapidly. Inflation moved that rapidly because of the adjustment we did in the currency from 155 to 197, and yet the pressure continued. And because this is a highly import-dependent economy, right, we saw inflation coming from the import side, import of foreign goods into the country. And what really gave rise to the inflationary pressure was actually the increase in energy prices, in this case petroleum price. You can imagine increasing petroleum price from 86 naira to 145 naira per liter. That is about 68%. And let me give you the analysis so you can understand what the increase in petroleum price did to inflation. If you had a truck of say about 200 baskets of tomatoes in Jigawa that wants to drive to say K2 market, right? The price of transportation moved up by 68% because the transporter increases price by 68%. As that tomatoes got to K2, it was offloaded at K2. The lady who does wholesale of the tomatoes also increases her price by 68%. The person who goes to K2 to buy say 5 or 10 baskets out of this 200 or 300 buys it and goes to K2 bus stop because he wants to transport it to Obalende where he will retail it. He gets to the bus stop and the cost of transportation also goes up by 68%. That is the third leg. He gets to Obalende. When he gets to Obalende, because he also must make profit, he paid 60% increase. He also increases his own price of his own tomato by that particular function. That is the fourth function. So you're looking at, by just increasing the price of petrol by 68%, we've seen almost close to about 200%, almost close to about 240% increase in prices. So that was what gave rise to the astronomical movement in inflation from about 9%, because it's important that I explain this, from 9% in January 2016 to about 18.72% in January 2017. And Monetary Policy Authority said, look, we have seen contraction in GDP. We have seen inflation at the highest level. Reserves are plummeting. Exchange rate in January 2017 or February was as high as 520 naira. There is no way a country with those kind of situation would survive those kind of pressures. Because naturally what you expect for a prosperous economy is rising growth, rising GDP, a stable exchange rate or low exchange rate. You build your reserve, interest rate will be low, and inflation is controlled. The monetary policy came from a standpoint and said, listen, with inflation at 18.7%, and indeed, Central Bank itself had conducted a study where they came up and said, look, when inflation goes above about 12% to 12.5% threshold, there is nothing you do that will impact positively on growth. And that there was a need by the Monetary Policy Committee to say, look, we must rein in on inflation. Do you understand? So we're now tackling both inflation and exchange rate simultaneously. Do you understand? So of course, in February, we started our intervention, and of course today, from 525 at that time, we've seen what has happened to the exchange rate. The story about how it came down, maybe in the course of this, we will talk about it. But of course, we also started to say, look, we must continue the regime of tightening to rein in inflation. And luckily, we've been able to achieve that from 18.7% in January to where it is now, which is about 15.9%. I'm very optimistic that in the course of January, February next year, it will moderate so rapidly to a point where we can begin, Monetary Policy Committee can begin to say, okay, now let us ease so that interest rates can come down. That is the entire program, and I'm so optimistic that this can be achieved.
You've done interventions in various sectors. We've seen agriculture and power. What the last monetary policy, which is just a few days ago, a number of people think you and your team had a very good opportunity to cut interest rates, perhaps do something symbolic, or perhaps open the back door of the cash reserve ratio and let some money out into the system, but you didn't do any of that. Why?
Well, you know, like I said, these are, in this case, 9 people sitting in a room, analyzing various data that was presented by the Monetary Policy Department, and based on that, come up with their own conclusions as to what they think should be done. Like I said earlier, we're still seeing inflation at 15.9%. And in any case, I do expect that there will be dissenting views by different analysts. But the point is that this is a case where all but one members of the Monetary Policy Committee took a direction, because there's still a feeling that we are currently in a period where we are building reserve.
What's your personal feeling, Mr. Emefiele?
About my personal feeling?
Yeah.
I expressed my personal feeling like others that yes, we should still wait, and that I am very optimistic that very soon, my vote is just one, and I'm saying very soon
how did you
we'll
vote?
begin to ease. Of course, I voted to maintain the status quo.
This economy needs money and needs liquidity very urgently. So how soon do you think you're going to open the doors or the windows, as it were, to let some fresh air come into the system?
Let me tell you this, Bosin. There is air, but you need to control it. There is an optimal level of liquid that is required to run a particular economy, particularly even in this case, given the kind of macroeconomic variables that we see in play right now, right? Luckily, we've been able to stabilize the exchange rate at the level that it is right now. And in any case, when we talked about exchange rate, that people should not use the black market as basis to determine the value of the naira, it has become clear now that it's a very shallow market, and once we took that decision, it collapsed like a pack of cards. So exchange rate stability we've achieved. We are now in a regime where we are building reserve. Build reserve to a level where we think we'll build enough buffer to be able to withstand any shock should it happen again. Two is that we're still looking at inflation. We're seeing inflation at 15.9%, right? And at a rate that is still even higher than monetary policy rate is what is called negative real interest rate. And that there is a need for us to see inflation at a level that is low, and that's why we're trying to say if inflation can be at a level of about 12 or slightly below, then it's easy for monetary policy to begin to say we want to ease. Okay, I want you to know this, and Nigerians to know this. Like I said, 2 days after I took office, I made a pledge that I want to see to it that interest rate came even lower than the level it was in 2014. Unfortunately, it had to go up because of the macroeconomic indices that we find confronting us. But I'm pretty much optimistic that very, very soon, and I mean very soon, I can't put my finger on time, with the kind of numbers and the kind of forecast that we see, I believe that this Monetary Policy Committee will begin to ease.
One of your comments that you read out a few days ago in the communique was that you're looking at the central bank and the US Fed will raise interest rates. The ECB, the European Central Bank, will be doing some quantitative easing and whatever it is. Do you think there could be some booby traps there waiting for the MPC in 2018 if you don't lower interest rate very quickly?
No, I would rather even expect that the reverse should be the case, because when ECB is taking money out, right? I mean, when ECB or the US increase interest rates, it means what they're trying to do is they are trying to pull money back into their economy. And what that means is that there will be an exit of funds from emerging markets.
Like Nigeria, which is a frontier market?
Emerging markets and frontier markets. And indeed, third quarter last year was all close to about $40 billion exiting from the frontier markets and the emerging markets. And I'm saying that we need to prepare for that. And preparing for that also meant that we needed to build our reserve buffers strong enough, right? But with a relatively high yield offered by the Nigerian market, and also because if you are thinking of a safe haven in a frontier or emerging market where you can invest your money, Nigeria remains one. Indeed, even in Africa where you can invest your money, I do not expect that there will be a massive outflow of funds, but rather we may even see to it that more flows come into Nigeria. That's our expectation. But what is important is that we still must prepare for just in case what you do not expect happens as a result of the decisions of the US Fed as well as the ECB. And that is why we're preparing at this time.
You need to prepare for something else, and I'm sure you're preparing for that. Electioneering for 2019, general election, will be 2018. So, your being the central bank governor means you are there when the first election was taking place and when the next one is taking place. So what will be the lessons you learned from 2014, 2015, preparing you for 2018, 2019 inflow political spending in the domestic economy?
Well, and the point is that the Monetary Policy Committee and the Monetary Policy Authorities, we will analyze the data that we have. Of course, from time to time during election, there's always electioneering spending. And that is the reason why the Monetary Policy Committee will look at what is the optimal level of liquidity that you need to run the economy at a particular point in time. and the appropriate decisions to be taken to ensure that the adverse consequences of spending, right, does not really result into unexpected outcomes that may hurt the economy at that time.
Would that be a difficult thing for you?
Nothing is difficult. Nothing is impossible, but I am telling you that this will be solved. Just like 2015 came and it went, right? Unfortunately, even it came at a time when there was an economic crisis. We are hoping that 2018, with the stability in crude prices, coupled with the fact that we are building reserves at this time, coupled with the fact that by that time, hopefully, we would have been able to tame inflation to a level that is comfortable and that is good for the country, we will deal with the situation when it confronts us.
Let me ask you about, let's start to the state of the banking sector and the financial system. Give us a status report.
I'd like to say that the strategic health of the banking industry is sound, because the major parameters you will use to assess it are still good as I speak with you. No doubt that if you have a chain, there are some strong points of a chain, there's also weak points of a chain, right? There are some weaknesses that have occurred arising purely from the issues bordering on the exogenous shocks that we have seen. But I'm saying in an economy where the standard practice for instance, capital adequacy ratio is 8%. The smallest bank in Nigeria, central bank, insists that they must keep capital adequacy ratio of 10%. The bigger banks, national and international banks, must have capital adequacy ratio of 15%. So what we find is that maybe a bank, maybe instead of 10, hits a threshold of about 9.8, 9.8, 9.9%, will try as much as possible to put pressure on that bank to ensure that they build capital by raising more capital, right? Or that they retain more of their profits so they don't pay dividend or pay less of dividend to people to shore up their capital. Those are the kind of things we're doing. But the important things I'm saying, even the 9.8 or 9.9%, which is maybe 0.1% below the threshold set by the central bank, is still above the standard practice or standard expected of 8%. The banking industry, the liquidity ratio that we find in the banks is still very good. As I speak today, liquidity ratio, average liquidity ratio is over 40% for all the banks. Do you understand? Now, aside from that, the only area where people have talked about is the level of NPLs. And let me tell you this, the level of NPL today that we have, which average about, in this case, maybe about 9 or a few points above 9%, is not unusual. And I will give you an example. In 2010, just about the time the stress test was conducted, just about the time we were just beginning to exit the last set of global shock. You know, there was a shock that was a momentary one for about 8 or 9 months between 2009. NPLs rose to 34%. 34%. But it came down, and of course, because of this shock again that started in 2015, we're seeing that the NPLs have moved up. And the bank and central bank is compelling the banks to increase their level of provisioning. And when you talk about provisioning, you are taking out of the earnings of the bank, setting it aside to say if this loan is not doing well, you take out of their profits and say, use it to write down your NPL. When you write down your NPL, the bank's NPL comes to a comfortable level, and that they can go back and pursue the borrowers who took the loans and never paid, and with that, if they recover the money, they write it back into their profit. So that's what we are doing, and I do not think that what is happening now is unusual. It is expected of I use the word, the global economy that is faced by challenges, and of course, it has its own effect on Nigeria, and we are going to manage it. Thank you.
The last two governors who sat in the office seem to knock the banks around a lot, but people believe that because you are not so hard on the banks. The first one went with the bank consolidation, and your immediate predecessor knocked about 5 or 6, 8 banks off the street, and all of that. Are you going to knock anyone? Do you see any of the banks that you need to knock within the term remaining in office? It looks like you're confirming most likely that you're very soft on the banks.
You see,
are you soft on the banks?
I don't think I am soft on the banks. And if you ask the banks today, and the basic practice you find all over the world is that banks pay heavy fines. You've heard about banks, I don't want to mention their names. When there's an infraction, they get to pay billions of dollars. In Nigeria, we've seen banks pay as high as 4 billion naira in fine. It has never happened in the history of the country, right? So different regimes may come with different approaches, and I can tell you that we are not about killing a bank, because you must realize that the banks are not owned by just those shareholders. We've come to a regime where we need to begin to say that banks are owned by depositors, not by shareholders. So when you kill a bank, you think you are killing individuals who brought in capital to run those things. So you are telling a lie. And I can give you this example. One of the weak banks that we are trying to deal with at this time, the institution of the bank, has a customer base of 4.5 million people. What do you think central bank will tell Nigerians, 4.5 million people, if you decide to liquidate the bank at a time when the economy is still struggling out of recession? So you need to be very careful when you come up and say, look, what you want to do is kill a bank, so that I cannot explain to 4.5 million people who have saved their life earnings, their life investment in banks. And that is why we believe that
that's what part of
different approaches.
But that's what part of a central bank should do.
Yeah.
Take out any of the banks that is systemically corrupting the system, as it were.
It depends on the level of corruption, Bosun. What I'm saying here is that it is not as bad to a point where you liquidate a bank.
Well, one of these banks is holding about almost $60-something million of a government money of TSAs that should go there, and they've asked for central bank guarantee. You're not providing them. So, should that bank go down, would you do it?
You see, the point is this: you should not. What we're doing, we're discussing with the bank a program of repayment. And I say this: if the bank, if it was a naira money of TSA, it's easy for us to debit the bank and pay the government. But because this is foreign currency, we are not in control of foreign currency account that you will debit and all that. So we will need to put in place an arrangement where the bank must look for a way to borrow foreign currency or source foreign currency to be able to pay these banks. And that's what we are engaging the banks. And I'm pretty much optimistic that this matter will be. I mean, we started from as high as $6 billion, but it's down to the kind of levels you are talking about now. So we've made good progress, but I can assure you that those funds will be recovered.
There's another commercial bank you've been spoon feeding, and the financial statement is not yet out for even for.
Let me tell you, there's nothing wrong in spoon feeding a bank, because the central bank is a lender of last resort. Do you understand? And what we're doing is part of our core mandate, that when a bank is in a kind of situation where they need help that can take them out of a problem, that we should do so. We're only playing our role as a lender of last resort.
You have 1.5 years left in office, thereabout. So, what do you have left to do as a central bank governor?
Both, you see, excuse me. You see,
can we retake that?
Governor, do you think you've done enough controversial monetary policy stance, like the ban of FX on 41 items, and you think you're now coasting home in just about less than 2 years of your tenure at the central bank?
Well, thank you very much again, both for bringing me to the issue of 41 items. There's hardly anyone who sees me that never talks about 41 items.
I was trying to avoid it because I was upset about it initially. A lot of people were upset about it.
Now.
Well, your view is important because you're the one, and I was thinking perhaps you will reduce the 41 items or you will increase it to 100, but you seem to be quiet about it recently.
Well, first of all, you don't want to increase it because you know that it's like people almost think that they even cost my dead mother about those affected by the 41 items. But I think
how did you arrive at the 41 in the first? Why not 42?
Okay, let me tell you this. It was a situation where we came from having depreciated the currency, and we began to say, what are the items that people are importing into the country that we can produce in the country? And we decided to draw up a list. I consulted with a couple of people, different people. And of course, naturally also consulted with the presidency, indeed, in this case, the president. And he said, look, why do we need to allocate foreign exchange to import goods that we can produce in this country? We came from a regime at a time in this country, in the 50s and 60s. This country survived with revenues from agriculture. We grew up reading in economics textbooks, government textbooks, about the granite pyramid, about cotton, about cocoa, about palm oil. Nigeria, Bosun, was the largest producer of of cotton, with 40% market share at the time. We were exporting palm oil, and this country was surviving from revenue from palm oil. But unfortunately, because we found oil, we lowered our guards, and then everybody ran to Lagos and Abuja. Everybody left the farms. But unfortunately, now that the oil price, we have been beaten by the shock, we are now beginning to say we needed to go back to it. So we are saying, what are those items that we're importing that we can produce locally? In fact, I was abused by a magazine that said I just went into a room and was looking at different plants and that I was not ashamed of even picking toothpick. Boston, let me tell you this. Toothpick can be produced in a room less than half the size of where we have right now. The important thing is about what is the outcome of producing toothpick in the country today rather than importing it. What we're saying is that by that you create jobs for your people. Today, there are young school leavers, NYSC graduates, even during their NYSC, they are producing toothpick in Abuja. They are producing toothpick in somewhere in Ogun State. Toothpick that we produce in Nigeria today is stronger, better, and cheaper than the import alternatives. And what we've done by this is that we've created jobs for people. Nigeria is the largest producer of cassava, Bosun. But yet, we have companies that produce starch and glucose that would go to the manufacturer to say, look, you need glucose and starch for your pharmaceutical formulations and everything, other things that you need. Come and patronize our local alternative for glucose. They refused. But because we put in place the foreign exchange restriction, the likes of the multinationals, today we have close to about 30 multinational companies that were importing starch and glucose with foreign exchange. They now patronize the locally made starch and glucose. That country called Saltry, somewhere in Oyo State, today has orders for glucose and starch that it has not even been able to make. It has provided jobs. What are we saying? It is not as simple as saying restrict them to foreign exchange, because I use the word that my own selfish interest is that I want to conserve the reserve. But what it does is that it has created jobs. It has created jobs for people, and that there is a need for us to support that program.
The corollary to that was that you've intervened aggressively in a number of sectors, and some of your critics say you are not minding your business, which is that of monetary policy only, and let the Ministry of Agriculture do its job and let power people face their business, that you're doing what does not concern you. How do you react to that?
Let me tell you this. It's about with this hand, washing this hand for it to be clean. And the idea is that our own is not about doing what other people are doing, but it's about the fact that we provide a financing mechanism that helps to catalyze growth for these sectors that we are talking about. Do you understand? We have nothing to do with what agric is supposed to do. What I do, we are complementing their efforts by providing financing. Before now, and I can say, before now, no small farmer can say that he walked into a bank and got a loan to grow rice. Before this program of Anchor Bora started, farmers go to farms without the right seedlings. They go to farms with substandard fertilizer. Herbicides are not good and all that. To the point that where 1 hectare of land, the output was only about 1.5 to 2 metric tons of rice. And we said we're going to intervene. Intervene means that a farmer needs maybe about 200 to 250,000 naira to cultivate a 1 hectare farm. And what did we do? We got some of our people to source the right seedlings. They sourced the fertilizer under the presidential initiative, sourced herbicides. So what those farmers got effectively as disbursed loan was about 50,000 naira and all that. But you know what that did? They got the right seedlings, the right fertilizers, they got the right herbicides, and they were able to plant. Today, in some parts of the country, we are seeing farmers coming out with as high as 7 tons per hectare. In some areas in Jugawa, we had 8.5. Dangote is currently on a mission to even bring in seedlings that can give us as high as 12 metric tons per hectare. What does that do? It makes the output higher, cost of production lower, and then the price of our rice can now compete with the import alternative. Those are the kind of things that need to be done. It's not about interfering, it's about intervening by providing finance that will catalyze that sector and ultimately create jobs for people and grow the economy. That's what we are doing. And I believe no one should be excluded. Remember, I said that this central bank is a people-centered central bank that will not just sit idle and say it's about interest rate, it's about inflation, it's about exchange rate. What decision do you take as a central bank that impacts directly and positively on the lives of the people? That's what we are talking about, Bosun.
How much more of this people-centered monetary policy, interventions, critical engagement would you be doing for the remainder of your tenure?
Well, the point is this, that it's not about counting how much of it you will do. But the important thing is this, Bosun. I sleep and I wake up every morning and I think, what can I do for this country? What can we do to create jobs for people? What can we do to improve the lives of our people? That is what that is what is important now. And that is why, luckily, the Anchor Borough program has become a flagship where those who are downtrodden, those who are vulnerable, can access finance. And we are going to take it, not just about rice or cassava or tomatoes. We are going to eventually review and revolutionize our micro, small and medium enterprises into an Anchor Borough program that will even go to small business and small manufacturing companies. Because that is what this country needs. We need to catalyze agriculture, catalyze small manufacturing, small businesses, because those will be the engine of growth for a country. You know what it does? You have a young school leaver, somebody who is unemployed, he comes out, he has some entrepreneurial skills, you want to encourage that person. That is the entire idea. What do you do by encouraging him? You create jobs for not just him, and you give him opportunity to feed his family, feed more and more people, create jobs for even other people. And that is how you can grow economy. That is how you can improve the life and well-being of your people. And that is a solemn pledge that we make as central bank, and we are determined to go forward on this.
When you sit in cabinet meetings and you sit with other cabinet ministers and also on the fiscal side, how much of what has happened in the last 2.5 or 3 years also come from the support that you get from other ministers and ministries and departments and agencies of the government?
Let me say this. People have always talked about collaboration between monetary and fiscal. That collaboration has never been there, has never been as good as it is right now. We are working together as a government. The monetary, under the auspices of the economic management team, the monetary and fiscal authorities work together. The decisions about the budget, central bank was part of it. Decisions about the development of the economic recovery and growth plan, central bank was part of it. Is it about the Eurobond? Central bank was part of it. And it's all part of collaboration between the monetary and fiscal authorities. So that's why when people talk about, oh, there's no coordination, I just laugh it off. But of course, try to ignore those kind of comments. But of course, this is an opportunity for me to say that collaboration has never been there as it is right now, and we can only expect that it can only grow even from strength to strength.
On the final note, what bothers you about the current state of Nigeria's financial statement?
Or rather, maybe what bothers me about Nigeria and Nigerian economy. I tell you, I repeat, by the year 2050, this country's population will be 450 million people by projection and estimate. That will present Nigeria, I repeat, as the third largest country in the world in terms of population. We as leaders, we need those of us that God has put in this position to drive the economy, to drive the country, must at every point have at the back of our mind the adverse consequences of not sitting down and thinking about how to improve the laws of our country. So what bothers me is that, and what gives me a kick, is that I must sit up, take decision that will impact the life of our people. Because you know what? If we don't plan for 3% growth in population annually, that will result in 450 million people in year 2050, Lord knows what will happen to you and I wearing suit and ties.
I'd like to keep my shirt and my suit and tie even until 2050 and beyond.
We have to work together.
Just with
think about the masses. Think about the weak. Think about the vulnerable. Because when they are also happy, you can only when you can be happy.
Then I can keep my shirt.
You can keep your shirt.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's very nice advice.
Mr.
Governor, thanks for speaking with us on Channels Television.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure having you.
I wish you all the best.
We're going to have more of this. Thank you very much.
Are you satisfied with the state of the independence? Are you satisfied with the state of independence of the Central?
I am very, very satisfied with the state of independence. The respect for the rule of law has been immense, and I say that all over the world, most central banks have their independence. They've been accorded that respect and authority by the political authorities, and that's why it's only in those kind of environments that you can see that people, monetary policy committee members, can sit down, take decisions that will impact positively the lives of the people.
Then you have some new MPC members joining you early in 2018. What's your expectation of them?
They will come and join the train, and we will sing the song to them that it's about we should take decisions that is in the interest of Nigeria, because every reason why we're here, why we're seated, is because we have been given opportunity to put in place policies that will benefit Nigeria and Nigerians.
Well, let's see how they vote, the new members, when they come on board next year. Thank you very much for speaking with us. We appreciate it, Mr. Governor.
Thank you.